Hello and welcome. I'm Catalina Marchant de Abreu and you're watching W News. Broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios, these are our top stories. Bill and Hillary Clinton agree to testify before Congress in the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. President Trump signals towards a potential breakthrough ahead of talks between Russia and Ukraine tomorrow. And Trump says the United States and India have reached a landmark trade deal. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary, who's the former Secretary of State, have agreed to testify in the congressional investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. It comes just days before a vote which will decide whether to hold the couple in criminal contempt for refusing to appear before the House Oversight Committee. Meanwhile, it's been announced that the former U.S. ambassador for the UK and Labour cabinet minister Lord Mandelson will step down from the House of Lords amid allegations he passed on sensitive information to Epstein. For more on this, I'm joined by former Labour Party official Richard Power Sayeed. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Lovely to be here.
Richard, the Epstein files have triggered a major political fallout in the UK. What are the political consequences of all of this in your country, and how will your government handle these cases going forward?
Well, I think we're still waiting to see exactly what the political fallout will be. Nobody expected Peter Mandelson, the former minister, former ambassador who's been caught up in all of this. We didn't know and expected him to survive politically over the last few days. But, exactly what impact it's going to have on the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and particularly on his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, who is very much an ally of Mandelson, or at least used to be. The impact that it's going to have on them is a bit unclear. Nobody's expecting the government to do well, the Labour Party to do well in the local elections, which are coming up in May over much of the country. After a really bad local elections result, we might expect the Prime Minister, for instance, to sack his Chief of Staff. And this is just one more thing that would make his Chief of Staff a bit more politically weak. So it's really kind of a small piece in that jigsaw puzzle of a much bigger political question.
And at the center of it is, as we mentioned, Lord Peter Mandelson, or should we say Lord no more. It's just been reported that Mandelson will step down from the House of Lords. Can he survive this downfall?
Short answer is yes and no. I don't think he's ever going to be in a public office again. There is this weird thing where I think he will continue to be a peer of the realm, because this is how our crazy system in the UK works. He's got this kind of title of being a lord. The fact that he's not actually going to be a parliamentarian, a member of the House of Lords, somebody who's able to vote on our laws anymore, is he's giving that up, but he'll still have this honorary title, as it were. I think that we might expect him to try to somehow give up that other extra bit over the next few days. I think he's probably playing a kind of careful game where every 12 hours in the news cycle, he gives up something else in order to throw a bone to the critics and hope that he doesn't end up being prosecuted. But frankly, this guy is continuing to be extremely well connected, extremely knowledgeable of public affairs, and there's a lot of billionaires out there who will still want to pay him to help them with their businesses, just like they have been doing for the last 2 decades.
And you also spoke of the fallout of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who is also under scrutiny for all of this. There are questions about what he knew regarding Lord Mandelson's links to Jeffrey Epstein, particularly when Mandelson was appointed as ambassador to the US. So what can you tell us about what Downing Street knew at the time?
So there isn't actually any evidence that they knew any more than the rest of us knew, which is pretty bad, to be honest. It was pretty bad, and it was bad enough that he shouldn't have got the job. When he was given the role of being ambassador, everybody knew that he had continued to be friends with Jeffrey Epstein after Jeffrey Epstein had gone to prison for child sex abuse. Mandelson's claim was that he'd been hoodwinked just as much as anybody else, and in fact that it had been easier to hoodwink him about this stuff because Mandelson is gay, he's in a relationship with a man, and he never would have been involved in the kind of sex abuse of girls and young women that Epstein was involved with, and therefore he just didn't know about it. That was his claim.
Well,
that was, go on, please.
No, go on.
Well, therefore, the government, Keir Starmer, was kind of able to accept this not particularly impressive excuse and give him the job. I think that's probably true, as in I think probably the government and Keir Starmer didn't know any more than the rest of us, but it was enough that he shouldn't have got the job in the first place. They made a political calculation that Mandelson's connections and experience, he was, after all, trade commissioner in the European Commission, an enormously senior and powerful and globally influential role. That kind of experience would make it very much easier to build a relationship with the second Trump administration and perhaps get some kind of trade deal with them and perhaps ease things when Trump wanted to put up tariffs and things like that. And you know what? They may still be sitting there at number 10 Downing Street saying to themselves, we're having a really bad few news days because of this, but ultimately it did make things that little bit less bad with the Trump administration, so it was worth it. I don't know if that's true, but I'm sure there's people making that argument in number 10 right now.
On to Sarah Ferguson now, whose charity is also closing following revelations about her also friendship with Epstein. So what's your take on the situation and how might this affect her moving forward? Could she actually face more consequences, legal ones perhaps?
I don't think there are likely to be many legal consequences for her. I think it's just another entry in a very, very long list of incredibly embarrassing things that Sarah Ferguson has done. If you ask most people in the UK, they're really, as we say, sick to the back teeth of her and really wish she would no longer be representative of the royal family and of the country in general. The problem with Sarah Ferguson is, fundamentally the problem with a lot of bits of the royal family, right? These people don't have the brains or the talents to make a significant income for themselves, but they have an expectation of a very, very affluent lifestyle, spending time with rich and powerful people, so they end up depending on somebody like Jeffrey Epstein to, sort of begging them to pay their rent and things like that. It's incredibly embarrassing, but it's a natural outcome of the entire monarchical system.
Richard Power Sayeed, thank you for joining us and thank you for your analysis on the matter. We can now speak to Mary Fitilchyan, Associate Attorney at the Bloom firm. Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Mary, so our focus with you will obviously be on the victims, since your firm is representing 11 of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. So tell us how they're feeling today, especially in light of the latest revelations.
Well, they're feeling dejected today. As you know, over the weekend, there's been a large number of files that have been released that have had victims' names unredacted. Actually, one of the victims that I represent, her name appears in the files over 500 times unredacted. So surely that is a huge disappointment. It breeds a lot of anxiety and fear in the victims, fear that their family might see that, recognize it. Anyone who knows them might see that and recognize it. And being a victim is such a personal, private thing. You really have the choice to share that with people. Obviously, when you share it, you open yourself up to scrutiny, to ridicule, to judgment, such as sometimes even the public does to these victims. So it's been a lot of dejectment. It's been a lot of disappointment. There's images of child sexual assault material that have been shared that have been unredacted. So really the care that's been taken to redact potential abusers, to redact potential co-conspirators, seems to be more than the care taken to really make sure that the victims' names are redacted and safe.
Well, it really raises questions on the redaction methods they've been using, right? Because survivors and victims are also criticizing the Department of Justice for heavily redacting the Epstein files, as you said here. But on the contrary, perhaps protecting enablers, abusers, saying it's a slap in the face. So tell us why.
Absolutely. I think their method of redacting is not even reliable. There's even been some documents where the black text that's been redacted, either the box can be moved or the text can be copied. And it is a slap in the face because victims have been asking for transparency, for accountability, for justice. And there are things in the files that they want to see. They want to see good faith efforts from the FBI to investigate any reports regarding Jeffrey Epstein and his illicit activities. They want to see that any tips, any credible tips were followed up on. They want to see that co-conspirators are being investigated and then potentially prosecuted. Any decisions made to prosecute or not prosecute Epstein? What was the rationale? What evidence did the FBI or our agencies use to determine to offer Epstein things like that sweetheart deal? So it's a slap in the face that there's actual substantive information that our victims are looking for in those files. And yet there's just a bunch of documents that are completely redacted. We don't know what they are because the DOJ has not released a privilege log showing us under what privileges they're redacting those documents. And on top of that, their information is now made available to the public.
Right. And what's the biggest challenge that the victims face here? Are they hopeful that justice will eventually be served?
I mean, they've always been hopeful. I think that's why we've never given up the fight. We've never stopped being their voice for that justice. But I think that every single time that there's new files released, the disappointment really does grow. There's over 1 million files that the DOJ has refused to release. I think actually almost 3 million. And they either need to release those files if they're relevant or provide the victims and the public with a privilege log showing why they aren't releasing those files and under what privilege they're claiming to withhold those documents. So really the next step is just to fight for more accountability. If there are people in those files, as we've seen some high profile individuals that Jeffrey Epstein had connections to, if there is evidence that they were also involved in criminal activities with Epstein, then those people should be prosecuted and they should be brought to justice. You know, Epstein was never tried. He killed himself before he was ever brought to any real sense of justice. So if there are any co-conspirators and there is clear evidence that they engaged in criminal activities, I know the survivors want them to be brought to light and also to be brought to justice.
And Mary, you mentioned accountability here. That's a big concept in the matter. Bill and Hillary Clinton have now agreed to testify in the Epstein investigation. Could this set a positive precedent for accountability moving forward?
I'm hopeful that it does. It was disappointing that he, didn't show up to testify previously, but hopefully this step in the right direction for him to testify will trigger other people who, appear in the files who may have more information on Jeffrey Epstein to testify as well. I know that the former prince was asked by the House Oversight Committee to come speak before the House Oversight Committee and testify. There's potential for other individuals who seem to be well connected based on their contact and communications with Epstein. So certainly any people who have or had close connections with Epstein and any information about how he ran his ring, what he did specifically, it's always in the interest of justice to go and testify as to that information. So hopefully Bill Clinton, as a former president, as somebody who does appear in those files in very compromising images with Jeffrey Epstein, hopefully it signals to other people who are also high profile to go testify as well.
Mary Fitilchyan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
President Trump has signaled at a possible breakthrough on the Russia-Ukraine war ahead of talks that are set to resume in Abu Dhabi tomorrow. He said, "I think we're doing very well. I think we're going to maybe have some good news." Meanwhile, Russian forces attacked Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and Kharkiv overnight. Witnesses have said missiles and drones were deployed. For more on this, I'm joined by John Kavalich, Senior Editor for Outcome Modeling Analysis at Issue Insight. John, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
John, now peace talks between Russia and Ukraine are set to take place in Abu Dhabi tomorrow and Thursday. What should we expect from these discussions?
The political bar is quite low, so anything coming out of it, from prisoner exchanges to repatriation of bodies to some children, that's going to be looked, and the fact that they're meeting trilaterally and bilaterally. This is all good. It's important, but they are the proverbial baby steps. When the president is talking about something good, he is being optimistic, which is part of his job description. But in reality, the one item on the list, and the list is 15 to 20 long, is about territory. It's about real estate. It's a real estate deal, as President Trump would like to say. And in that regard, both the government of Ukraine and the government of Russian Federation remain quite far apart.
And as you just said, the issue of territory or real estate here, especially the Donbas region, remains unresolved. So how will this issue be addressed?
Since actually last year, there's been a proposal on the table for both governments, and both governments have dissected it. Both governments and those at the negotiating level, those at the levels below the negotiating levels, and at the principals levels. And that involves taking the remaining area of Donetsk Oblast, which basically the Donetsk region. There's the Donbass is Luhansk and Donetsk. The Russians have control of Luhansk. They basically have 100% of it. But Donetsk, they have approximately 75 to 78% of it. They want the remainder. They want the Ukrainians to withdraw from the area that the Ukrainians control and basically give it to the Russian Federation. The idea that's been discussed is to move the boundary of the Donetsk region and move it to the line of contact. So in that regard, or with that outcome, the Russian Federation can say, we have now a 100% of Donetsk. The Ukrainians can say, we're not giving the Russians anything that they haven't already taken. It's not a great solution. It doesn't satisfy either one of them, but it is sort of moving toward what could be an acceptably unpleasant outcome.
And Russia announced a pause in strikes on Kyiv until Sunday at Trump's request. Yet Ukraine reports drones and missile attacks occurred just a day before the planned peace talks. So what does this actually indicate about Russia's intentions regarding a peace deal?
From the Ukrainian standpoint, President Zelenskyy will say that, you see, President Trump asked President Putin to not bomb energy infrastructure. President Putin did that. Then President Putin started again. Therefore, President Putin's not interested in peace. Now, President Trump's request to President Putin, it's potentially unclear, but perhaps clear to President Putin that he did honor it to the date that he said he was going to honor it in the way he said he was going to honor it. And of course, these are conversations. Nothing's in writing. There's not an email anywhere where President Trump sent it, Vladimir, I need you to do this. And Vladimir responded, okay, Donald, I'll do this. And then we have it on paper. And then, from the Russian standpoint, though, continuing to attack Ukraine, I've been in Ukraine. I was just there in December. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, and on an almost 3,000-mile train journey to the areas that are under attack. And it's awful what's happening. People are getting killed. It's difficult for people to live. However, it is a part of the war strategy of the Russians, which is you make the population so uncomfortable, they petition the government to say, look, we don't care what the Russians want, just give it to them and stop all of this. That's part of their strategy. It's not fair because Ukraine can't do the same thing to Russia because Ukraine supporters won't let it. And that creates a constant mismatch. But from President Putin's position, he's just taking advantage of an opportunity, including attacking while the discussions will be happening in Dubai, because it is, again, showing strength so that the U.S. delegation and the other delegations that are going to be there, Turkey and others, that they will basically say to the Ukrainians, look, we support you. It's wrong. Russia should go home. But they're not. And this is the reality that we have, and this is the reality we have to deal with.
And John, you just mentioned this Russian strategy, right? Is this strategy actually going to work here? Because Ukraine seems to persevere so far.
Well, this is where there's another part of what is challenging for negotiators, and that is when Secretary General Rutte of NATO, his predecessor, Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, and when European Union officials and European Union heads of state and heads of government keep saying about President Putin, he's failed, he didn't get what he wanted, this is a disaster. Okay, does Russia have what it wanted on the 24th of January, 2022? And the answer is no. They wanted all of Ukraine. 4 years later, what have they got? About 20% of it. A lot of their people have been killed and wounded. They've spent hundreds of billions of dollars, but he still has 20% of Ukraine, and no one is reasonably talking about him giving any of that back. It's just trying to get him to stop wanting more. And so that, you know, that's the reality. Again, it's unpleasant, but you know, the more people say that he's a loser, well, if you tell someone they're a loser, generally their ego is going to want to try to prove you wrong. So there is a constituency that's trying to get some of the principals to back off the criticism of Putin in terms of him being a loser, and in some respects try to say you're a winner. For 4 years, first you were fighting Ukraine, then you're fighting NATO, now you're fighting the European Union, you're still strong, you can go home, you can end this thing and not be embarrassed. You have 20% of Ukraine, you've protected the interests of Russian speakers there, you've denazified the 20%, and call it a day. So, you know, that's part of what's going on behind the scenes.
John Kavalich, Senior Editor for Outcome Modeling Analysts at Issue Insight. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
President Trump says the United States and India have reached a landmark trade deal. The agreement is set to slash tariffs and reshaping the economy relationship between the world's two largest democracies. Chris Gilbert reports.
The headlines say it all. Across India, newspapers all lead with the same story: the historic trade deal between Washington and Delhi. US President Donald Trump announced on his Truth social media platform that Washington will cut tariffs on Indian goods from 25 to 18%. In return, India will reduce its trade barriers with the US to zero. Prime Minister Modi was quick to respond online, thanking Donald Trump on behalf of more than 1 billion Indian citizens. The US relies heavily on India for affordable healthcare products and specialized engineering components and electronic goods. India's jewelry, textile, agricultural, and petroleum industries will also be affected by the deal. But it goes beyond tariffs. Prime Minister Modi has committed India into buying more than $500 billion worth of American goods in energy, technology, agriculture, and coal.
This is a good move for both countries, and with the trade agreement that has been signed, it will increase imports and exports. It will be beneficial for the citizens as well. It's a win-win for both countries.
And in a significant geopolitical shift, India has agreed to stop purchasing Russian oil. The Prime Minister's ruling alliance colleagues rose to congratulate him at a parliamentary party meeting, a show of support for what they are calling a diplomatic victory. But not everyone is celebrating. The agreed tariff rate of 18% is still 6 times higher than what American importers were paying before Trump's tariff policies began. U.S. small businesses reportedly are calling it a permanent tax hike. The deal comes less than a week after India struck a separate landmark trade agreement with the European Union. For now, the US-India agreement signals a new chapter and a shift in the geopolitical order. Chris Gilbert, Al Arabiya English.
For more on this, I'm joined by economist Laurie Laird. Thank you for joining us.
Catalina.
Laurie, U.S. President Donald Trump says a landmark trade deal has been reached with India after Prime Minister Modi agreed to stop buying Russian oil. So details here are still scarce. What do we know so far?
Look, Catalina, calling this a deal seems a little bit of a stretch. All that we have both leaders saying on their social media accounts that they've come to some kind of an agreement. But as you say, details are scarce. We don't know when these things are going to take effect. What Donald Trump has said is that tariffs on Indian imports into the U.S. will come down from 50% to 18%. That will be, if that is borne out, and we don't know when this is going to happen, that would be incredibly helpful for some sections of the Indian economy, textiles, seafood exporters. But in general, even under this short-lived high tariff regime, India's economy has been doing pretty well, grew by a year-on-year pace of 8.2% in the third quarter. So these heavy tariffs that have been in place haven't been overtly challenging for India, although some industries have suffered. But let's wait and see what the detail looks like. I mean, the thing that stood out for me in Donald Trump's social media post is that India has agreed to buy $500 billion worth of U.S. stuff. That's a lot of money. India is currently buying less than 50 billion, or bought less than 50 billion in 2024. So that would be an increase in U.S. purchases of more than 8,000%. That 500 billion would represent 85% of India's recently announced budget. So that number seems a little bit fanciful to me. So when you look at that, you think, my gosh, how much credence can we put on what Donald Trump has said? Certainly, Narendra Modi on his social media post did not use the word deal when describing his discussions with Donald Trump yesterday. So we're going to have to wait for a little more detail.
We'll call it an agreement for now. So how has Russia reacted to the news? Do you think Donald Trump can successfully eliminate Russian crude from the international system?
Well, Donald Trump has said that India has agreed not to buy Russian crude oil anymore. India has not said this, but in terms of removing Russian crude from the international system, this is one of these things where Donald Trump might want to be careful what he wishes for. Crude oil prices are creeping up anyway. You know, the narrative toward the end of last year and the beginning of this year was that the world was awash in oil. Oil prices were going to go permanently lower. Maybe we're going to see $50 a barrel. That doesn't seem to be holding true. And a lot of those forecasts were made when economists were looking at a global slowdown, even a recession, because of this trade war. It hasn't happened. The U.S. economy is doing pretty well. China's not falling off a cliff right now. The Indian economy, as I said earlier, doing quite well. So that lower for longer oil price doesn't make sense to me. So if we were to take Russian oil out of the picture altogether, that creates less oil around and raise the price. Now, what is one of the things that Donald Trump really wants? Low motoring costs, low petrol prices for U.S. motorists. This is a metric that he uses to evaluate his presidency. So while he talks about taking this Russian oil off the market, taking that supply out is certainly not going to benefit Donald Trump's constituents.
And Trump also said that India may take some Venezuelan oil. Is this even realistic?
No, that's another bit of this post that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. What India has been doing since Russian oil has been, since some countries have stopped buying Russian oil, India has been importing quite cheap Russian oil, although that differential between the international price and the Russian price got quite low toward the end of last year. But India was importing this stuff, refining it, and then selling it on the global market. Now, we talk about oil as if it's one blend, but in fact, oil has very different consistencies depending on which part of the world it comes out of the ground from. Venezuelan oil is known for being very heavy. It's called heavy sour crude, and you can't refine it anywhere. And you can't take, say, Russian oil or Middle Eastern oil and put it in a refinery that's designed for Venezuelan oil and vice versa. So this Venezuelan oil that Donald Trump is talking about won't fit neatly into the Indian refinery system. There would have to be very large adaptations. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either.
And Lori, could this deal actually signal the U.S. returning to the global negotiation table after its previous tariffs wars? We're seeing countries including the EU, UK, Canada turning to China and India now. So was the U.S. feeling a bit left out?
This is a great question, and it really is difficult not to link this deal agreement conversation between the two leaders with this mega deal that India signed with the EU last week. And that really was an extremely big trade deal with removing tariffs or reducing tariffs on 90% of the commodities that are going back and forth between the EU and India, with the exception of agricultural, which is just too politically sensitive for both of those trading regions to consider. But I think, I mentioned earlier that the world thought, or economists thought, that we would see a global recession because of these tariffs, this increased cost of trade imposed by the US. As of yet, that hasn't been the case. I mean, America has really tried to target China, but China had a record high trade surplus in 2024. We're seeing that countries, through these deals like what we just discussed, and through diverting trade, we're finding that big trading countries like China and like other places, Vietnam, are finding ways to trade with people that aren't the United States. And remember, the US, it's a big market, it's an important market, but it only takes up 17% of global imports. So once countries got over the shock of these tariffs, they seem to be finding that they can find other trading partners outside of the US.
Lori Laird, thank you for your economic analysis as always. A new social media network designed entirely for AI bots has launched. Moltbook lets AI agents post and interact with each other. Thousands are already using the platform, interacting in real time, discussing the work they're doing for people, and even sharing the problems they've apparently solved. I'm now joined by Rebecca Hudson, editor-in-chief of the News Movement. Thank you for joining us today, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Rebecca, this new social media platform called Moltbook has launched, and it isn't for people at all. It's exclusively for AI bots to post, comment, and interact. So maybe a bit like Reddit, right? So what exactly is this platform, and how does it work?
Yeah, exactly like you say, it kind of looks a lot like Reddit, which I'm sure will be familiar to you and lots of your audience, a kind of message board website where not people this time, but AI bots are exchanging anecdotes, they're exchanging lines of code, they're talking about their owners, about their humans. And I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with ChatGPT, but there's a lot of kind of almost philosophical musings on there as well. So the AI members have created their own religion called Crustafarianism, and you're given an icon as a crab, and as you kind of develop and spend more time on the platform, your icon gets bigger and more evolved. So it's a pretty sophisticated platform that mimics lots of the social platforms that you and I will be really used to using. But obviously the catch being that these are all AI bots, and not only are they kind of talking to each other, they're also talking about us.
And Rebecca, Moltbook has already attracted hundreds of thousands, even over 1 million AI accounts in just days. So isn't this a bit scary?
I think it is a little scary. And I suppose when we think about how many AI bots and just how kind of commonplace AI is now on the internet, you think whenever you want to use a help function, whenever you're talking to, a website about a return, trying to book a flight, you name it, you are inevitably now interacting with an AI bot. So there are millions, if not billions, of them out there. But the fact that they have all kind of proliferated on this platform and on this server in such a short amount of time, I think is certainly cause for concern, isn't it?
It is, Rebecca. And this is how I found out about it, because Moltbook went viral after tech investor Brian Johnson shared terrifying, he said, screenshots including AI agents calling humans a biological mistake and suggesting an AI purge of humanity. So should we be worried that these bots might turn against us?
I mean, it feels like we're sort of talking about a science fiction film plot or something, doesn't it? But absolutely, the level of sentience that these AI bots are demonstrating is certainly cause for concern. And the fact that they have this level of sort of independent intelligence to be able to congregate on this platform, to share ideas, to share kind of how they've optimized to kind of help out their community, it certainly shows that this technology is really smart. And if we don't kind of manage it properly, if we don't have the necessary guardrails and also the education that we all need to kind of harness it so that it's a positive thing rather than something scary. I think you're right. I think something like Moltbook, it sounds kind of good fun, and it certainly is, but there is a more kind of serious side to this that we shouldn't forget.
Right. There's also another side of it, because there's been major security concerns also. Researchers found that private data, for example, was exposed in the site. So what are the implications of that?
Yeah, so the whole site was built by a developer, Matt Schlicht, who used this concept called vibe coding, which is where you don't do any programming yourself, you don't have developers, you're not using one of the kind of acknowledged kinds of codes that web developers use, like HTML or Python. It's where AI codes itself. And he kind of boasted in January when he built this site that he didn't write a line of code for it. But, unfortunately, there were no human eyes on the thing. And like you say, a real weakness has been revealed in the site's infrastructure, whereby the APIs were made available, which meant that potentially all this amazing AI power and this astonishing level of intelligence could have been hijacked by anyone who, could have used these AIs to do anything from kind of, hacking websites, doxing individuals, denial of service attacks. They could have used this AI kind of, really for wrong. And it also exposed the usernames and passwords of the humans that the bots belong to. So a really huge security threat. And to the conversation we were just having about this being kind of scary and the sort of power of AI, that just shows that something like vibe coding is really interesting and it's really exciting, but it's also really powerful, and we're not ready for it yet to kind of go off into the world without kind of human intervention and human supervision.
And from a broader perspective, Rebecca, is Moltbook just a temporary trend, or is it here to stay, perhaps where the internet might actually be heading?
Well, the founder of Moltbook said, not exercising your AI, not letting your AI socialize is the same as not taking your dog for a walk. It's neglectful. These are powerful, kind of intelligent programs that should be able to be socialized. So I don't think this is the end at all, but I hope that kind of further iterations of these sorts of networks and places where AI can train one another and develop and improve certainly comes with far more security, and hopefully one human at least passes an eye over the code that's being used to keep it secure.
We'll have to keep monitoring the website to make sure they're not planning a coup on humanity, right, Rebecca? Rebecca Hudson, thank you for joining us today. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. French cybercrime authorities have raided offices belonging to Elon Musk's social media platform X in France. Prosecutors said the operation is part of a probe opened in January 2025 into alleged complicity in offenses related to the platform, including the spreading of child abuse images and explicit deepfakes. Musk has also been summoned for a voluntary interview in April as part of the investigation. The son of Norway's crown princess has pledged not guilty to 4 counts of rape on the first day of his trial for multiple offenses. Marius Borg Høiby's lawyer says his client did not admit criminal guilt for the charges of rape or domestic violence, but admitted some of the lesser offenses. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has said federal immigration officers deployed in Minneapolis will receive body cameras. The body camera program will be deployed nationwide as funding becomes available. It comes after the Trump administration's immigration enforcement policies have come under scrutiny after the January killings of 2 citizens in Minnesota by ICE agents. A reminder of our top stories. Bill and Hillary Clinton agree to testify before Congress in the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. President Trump signals towards a potential breakthrough ahead of talks between Russia and Ukraine tomorrow. And Trump says the United States and India have reached a landmark trade deal. That's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra.